thanks very much, Tim, for talking to us today. As a starter, I just wanted to take you back to what is now almost 10 years from when the SDC published as a report your report, Prosperity Without Growth. I was just wondering, going back then, the talk was that it was quite controversial around government. What was the issues? What was the sensitive issues? What were the bits that you had to fight most to keep in that initial report?
Well, it was a very interesting process. I mean, we didn't fight that much before the report itself. When I was drafting the report, basically we took every chapter periodically to an advisory group of representatives from across the government, so from Treasury, from DEFRA, from business. You know, we had all those people in the room. There were tricky moments, like when we had announced that we were going to do this inquiry into growth and sustainability, and I remember distinctly one meeting where a Treasury official stood up after I'd given the presentation and said, basically, so sustainability, that's really about going back to live in caves, is that what you mean? And all I had really done at that point was to say, you know, there is a de facto question about an increasing economy on a finite planet, but it was seen as being, you know, so there was definitely rumblings in the background which suggested that this was a slightly dangerous thing to do, and our relationship, which was with DEFRA as our sponsoring department, was very careful that we did all this, you know, sounding out the messages with the right people before the report, right down actually to going to advisors at Number 10 to ask if it would be okay for us to have this title, Prosperity Without Growth. And you know, getting an answer back which in retrospect was a little bit ambiguous, which said, I don't think it matters what you call it. we took to mean that, okay, we'll go with Prosperity Without Growth. So we will put a question mark at the end of it, because we don't want to, you know, rattle a cage too much. It's very much an invitation to a conversation. Is it possible to have prosperity in a non-growing economy? And then actually at the time that the report was launched, which was the end of March 2009, actually, so it's 9 years ago.
Yeah.
It just happened to coincide with the G20 meeting in London, just after the financial crisis.
Yes. Right.
So the Prime Minister had obviously, you know, drawn the leaders of the world together at that point to kickstart growth. So when this report landed the week before on his table, him having presumably not spoken to the advisor who advised us, it didn't matter what we called it. There was a quite fierce reaction. There was, and that fierce reaction maintained a kind of almost radio silence between us as the Commission and the government in relation to that particular conversation. So it didn't do the job that a government commission's report should do, which is in terms of advising its government. It turned out to do a completely different job, which was much broader in scope, appealed to a much wider audience, suddenly became sort of viral through the internet, rather than being a commission advising its government. And we had very little of that conversation actually at that time. It was an incredibly difficult period. It was that relationship became problematic partly because of the existence of that report.
So they froze you out, or they just did not respond. They did not comment. They pretended the report didn't exist.
Not entirely, but that was the gist of it. Really, that was the gist of it. There were certain places where, for example, in relation to that, and another actually at the end of my time as a commissioner, where I got a letter from Number 10 thanking me for the good work that I had done advising the government on prosperity and growth. So there was elements of, we recognise that this is there.
They thanked you for advising them on prosperity and growth.
Yeah. So that was good to know. But it was a difficult kind of message for government, particularly at that time, I think. And in retrospect, sometimes I'm stunned by our naivety in thinking that we could just write that report in that way with that title and expect government to act differently.
So do you think, I mean, did that actually partly lead to the demise of the SDC, do you think?
That's an open question. I mean, it's a really tricky question, because certainly for my fellow commissioners, because and indeed for the existence of such a commission, because if that were the case, then I would have to accept some responsibility for the demise of a really useful institution and the loss of the posts of all those other commissions. I think in a way it's a little bit kind of just assigning too much importance to that one thing. I mean, the commission was set alight in a bonfire of quangos in the wake of an understanding that we couldn't, what we believed was an understanding that we had to cut back public spending by getting rid of all these bodies which were sitting there somehow in an undemocratic way. I'm not using that term myself, but that was used at the time.
And I suppose also you had the Climate Change Commission that was then set up as a potential competitor.
The Climate Change Commission was being set up under the Climate Change Act. That was clearly an important thing to have, and it did overlap to some extent with the remit of the Commission, not on this particular issue perhaps, but on some of the work that we were doing.